Ladies and gentlemen, Tucker Carlson, who was one of the only people who did not want to talk about 2020. He was the one, when he still worked for news, screamed louder than anyone else, well, where's the evidence? He called out the Kraken lady. He called out Rudy Giuliani, and he was saying, where's the evidence? But now he's talking about it. Now he's sounding the alarm leading up to 2024. Now he's actually has guests like on his yesterday show who expose everything that our own government knew. They knew what was going to happen. Not only did they know, but they allowed it. They actually did it. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to ANN, American News Network. I'm your host, Vlad. Really quickly, I want to thank the sponsor of this video, and that is Midas Gold Group. They're a second-generation veteran, family-owned gold, silver, and precious metals IRA firm. They protect your money from Bidenomics. They are backed by Sebastian Gorka himself. Contact them today at MidasGoldGroup.com or call them at 480-360-3000. Mention Vlad from American News Network. They'll hook you up with a bunch of free silver. Let's get into this video. We're going to watch it. I mean, this guy just nothing but truth and facts.
But in the U.S., it was all Trump. And so essentially what they said is, well, the only other domestic intelligence equity we have in the U.S. besides the FBI is the DHS. So we are going to essentially take the CIA's power to rig and bribe foreign media organizations, which is a power they've had since the day they were born in 1947. And we're going to combine that with the power, with the domestic jurisdiction of the FBI by putting it at DHS. So DHS was basically deputized. It was empowered through this obscure little cybersecurity agency to have the combined powers that the CIA has abroad with the jurisdiction of the FBI at home. And the way they did this, how did an obscure little cybersecurity agency get this power? Was they did a funny little series of switcheroos. So this little thing called CISA, they didn't call it the Disinformation Governance Board. They didn't call it the Censorship Agency. They gave it an obscure little name that no one would notice called the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, who its founder said, we care about security so much it's in our name twice. You know, everybody sort of closed their eyes and pretended, that's what it was. But it was created by act of Congress in 2018 because of the perceived threat that Russia had hacked the 2016 election, had physically hacked it. And so we needed the cybersecurity.
I want to stop and mention something here. So it was created in 2018 after the midterms when Trump was in office. They said, oh, Russia did so many bad stuff in 2016. We need to create this new organization that is going to prevent from 2016 repeating itself in 2020. And then that government organization did what they did in 2020. So they used lies to cheat. Again, they used lies to cheat.
Power to be able to deal with that. And essentially on the heels of a CIA memo on January 6, 2017, and a same-day DHS executive order on January 6, 2017, arguing that Russia had interfered in the 2016 election, and a DHS mandate saying that elections are now critical infrastructure, you had this new power within DHS to say that cybersecurity attacks on elections are now our purview. And then they did two cute things. One, they said mis, dis, and malinformation online are a form of cybersecurity attack. They are a cyber attack because they are happening online. And they said, well, actually, Russian disinformation is, we're actually protecting democracy and elections. We don't need a Russian predicate after Russiagate died. So just like that, you had this cybersecurity agency be able to legally make the argument that your tweets about mail-in ballots, if you undermine public faith and confidence in them as a legitimate form of voting, you were now conducting a cyber attack on U.S. critical infrastructure by articulating misinformation on Twitter. And just like that, now what they did then is they
so in other words, complaining about election fraud is the same as taking down our power grid.
Yes, you could literally be on your toilet seat at 9:30 on a Thursday night and tweet, "I think that mail-in ballots are illegitimate," and you were essentially then caught up in the crosshairs of the Department of Homeland Security classifying you as conducting a cyber attack on U.S. critical infrastructure because you.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to pause a couple times throughout the video. This, before mail-in ballots were like a national thing, before COVID was a thing, they were already moving to make your tweets criticizing mail-in ballots a crime. Going back to 2017, they were already planning. So their foundation was the lie about Russiagate. So the Russiagate lie was the foundation that they built on. This is why I say I'm not really worried. Sooner or later, the cabal will be taken down because the foundation is built on lies. Today, actually, I went to see my doctor for my regular checkup, and the nurse, me and her, started talking about politics. This lady still believes that if it wasn't for Putin, Hillary would have won 2016. So she's like this radical left. And I actually said, "Are you an election denier?" "No, I'm not. No, I'm not. These are facts." I'm like, "Well, I think 2020 was rigged." She's like, "No, it wasn't." I'm like, "Wait, you just told me 2016 was, and you're not an election denier. But when I say 2020 was, you say you're not allowed to say that." These people are crazy, and their foundation is lies. Russiagate, and then they built off of that. Keep that in mind as we're going forward in the video.
We're doing misinformation online in the cyber realm, and misinformation is a cyber attack on democracy when it undermines public faith and confidence in our democratic elections and our democratic institutions. They would end up going far beyond that. They would actually define democratic institutions as being another thing that was a cyber security attack to undermine. And lo and behold, the mainstream media is considered a democratic institution. That would come later. What ended up happening was, in advance of the 2020 election, starting in April of 2020, although this goes back before, you had this essentially never Trump neocon Republican DHS working with essentially NATO on the national security side and essentially the DNC, if you will, to use DHS as the launching point for a government-coordinated mass censorship campaign spanning every single social media platform on Earth in order to pre-censor the ability to dispute the legitimacy of mail-in ballots. And here's how they did this. They aggregated 4 different institutions, Stanford University, the University of Washington, a company called Graphica, and the Atlanta Council. Now, all 4 of these institutions, the centers within them, were essentially Pentagon cutouts. You had at the Stanford Internet Observatory, it was actually run by Michael McFaul. If you know Michael McFaul, he was the U.S. ambassador to Russia under the Obama administration, and he personally authored a 7-step playbook for how to successfully orchestrate a color revolution. That is, and part of that involved maintaining total control over media and social media, juicing up the civil society outfits, calling elections illegitimate in order to, now mind you, all of these people were professional Russiagators and professional election delegitimizers in 2016. And then, well, I'll get to that in a sec. So Stanford University, nominally the Stanford Internet Observatory under Michael McFaul, was run by Alex Stamos, who was formerly a Facebook executive who coordinated with ODNI and with respect to Russiagate, taking down Russian propaganda at Facebook. So this is another liaison, essentially, to the national security state. And under Alex Stamos at Stanford Internet Observatory was Renee DiResta, who started her career in the CIA and wrote the Senate Intelligence Committee report on Russian disinformation. And there's a lot more there that I'll get to another time. But the next institution was the University of Washington, which is essentially the Bill Gates University in Seattle, who is headed by Kate Starbird, who is basically 3 generations of military brass, who got her PhD in crisis informatics, essentially doing social media surveillance for the Pentagon and getting DARPA funding and working essentially with the national security state, then repurposed to take on mail-in ballots. The third firm, Graphica, got $7 million in Pentagon grants and got their start as part of the Pentagon's Minerva Initiative. The Minerva Initiative is the psychological warfare research center of the Pentagon. This group was doing social media spying and narrative mapping for the Pentagon until the 2016 election happened, and then were repurposed into a partnership with the Department of Homeland Security to censor 22 million Trump tweets, pro-Trump tweets about mail-in ballots. And then the fourth institution, as I mentioned, was the Atlantic Council, who's got 7 CIA directors on the board. So one after another, it is exactly what Ben Rhodes described during the Obama era as the blob, the foreign policy establishment. It's either it's the Defense Department, the State Department, or the CIA every single time. And of course, this was because they were threatened by Trump's foreign policy. And so while much of the censorship looks like it's coming domestically, it's actually by our foreign-facing Department of Dirty Tricks Color Revolution blob, who are professional government topplers, who were then basically descended on the 2020 election. Now, they did this. They explicitly said, the head of this election integrity partnership, on tape, and my foundation clipped them, and it's been played before Congress, and it's in a part of the Missouri v. Biden lawsuit now. But they explicitly said on tape that they were set up to do what the government was banned from doing itself. And then they articulate.
So do you hear that, ladies and gentlemen? So the same people that said Russia, 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 Putin, Trump, and then they were disproven. They were proven as liars. They took that foundation of lies before. That's why John Durham, he's a rhino. He's a snake. He didn't charge anybody, even though he was a special prosecutor and he had the power to charge Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, the Obama administration. He had authority to go after all of them. He did none of that. So the same people that told us all those lies then used that foundation of lies to open up a new branch, security branch in the government back in 2017 to start planning for 2020. He's about to get to talking about, the scamdemic. And he's like, how did they know in 2017 that everybody's going to be sitting at home voting by mail? And we need to start fighting tweets and posts on social media of people criticizing voting by mail. That's why I say the scamdemic was planned to go against one man, and that's Trump.
Articulated a multi-step framework in order to coerce all the tech companies to take censorship actions they said on tape the tech companies would not have done but for their pressure, which involved using threats of government force because they were the deputized arm of the government. They had a formal partnership with the DHS. They were able to use DHS's proprietary domestic disinformation switchboard to immediately talk to top brass at all the tech companies for takedowns. And they bragged on tape about how they got the tech companies to all systematically adopt a new terms of service speech violation ban called delegitimization, which meant any tweet, any YouTube video, any Facebook post, any TikTok video, any Discord post, any Twitch video, anything on the internet that undermined public faith and confidence in the use of mail-in ballots or early voting drop boxes or ballot tabulation issues on election day was a prima facie terms of service violation policy under this new delegitimization policy that they only adopted because of pass-through government pressure from the Election Integrity Partnership, which they bragged about on tape, including the grid that they used to do this, and simultaneously invoking threats of government breaking them up or government stopping doing favors for the tech companies unless they did this, as well as inducing crisis PR by working with their media allies. So, and they said the government, DHS, could not do that themselves, and so they set up this basically constellation of State Department, Pentagon, and IC networks to run this pre-censorship campaign, which by their own math had 22 million tweets on Twitter alone. And mind you, they did this on 15 platforms. So this is hundreds of millions of posts, which were all scanned and banned or throttled so that they could not be amplified, or they exist in a sort of limited state purgatory, or had these frictions affixed to them in the form of fact-checking labels where you couldn't actually click through the thing, or you had to, it was an inconvenience to be able to share it. Now, they did this 7 months before the election, because at the time they were worried about the perceived legitimacy of a Biden victory in the case of a so-called red mirage blue shift event. They knew the only way that Biden would be able to would win mathematically was through the disproportionate Democrat use of mail-in ballots. They knew there would be a crisis because it was going to look extremely weird if Trump looked like he won by 7 states. In November, and then 3 days later, it comes out actually the election switched. I mean, that would put the election crisis of the Bush-Gore election on a level of steroids that the national security state said, well, the public will not be prepared for. So what we need to do is we need to, in advance, we need to pre-censor the ability to even question legitimacy. This took out.
Wait. May I ask you to pause right there?
Key influences.
So what you're saying is, what you're suggesting is, they knew the outcome of the election 7 months before it was held.
It looks very bad. Certainly, what they did
That's
is,
it. Yes, Mike, it does look very bad.
And especially when you combine this with the fact that this is right on the heels of the impeachment, the Pentagon-led, CIA-led impeachment. It was Eric Cimarella from the CIA, and it was the Vindmans from the Pentagon who led the impeachment of Trump in late 2019 over, an alleged phone call around withholding Ukraine aid. This same network, which came straight out of the Pentagon hybrid warfare network, military censorship network created after the first, Ukraine crisis in 2014, were the lead architects of the Ukraine impeachment in 2019, and then essentially came back on steroids as part of the 2020 election censorship operation. But, from their perspective, I mean, it certainly looks like the perfect crime. These were the people. DHS at the time had actually federalized much of the National Election Administration through this January 6, 2017 executive order from outgoing Obama DHS head Jed Johnson, which essentially wrapped all 50 states up into a formal DHS partnership. So DHS was simultaneously in charge of the administration of the election in many respects, and the censorship of anyone who challenged the administration of the election. This is like, putting essentially the defendant of a trial as the judge and jury of the trial. It was
but you're not describing democracy. I mean, you're describing a country in which democracy is impossible.
What I'm essentially describing is military rule. I mean, what's happened with the rise of the censorship industry is a total inversion of the idea of democracy itself. Democracy sort of draws its legitimacy from the idea that it is ruled by consent of the people being ruled. That is, it's not really being ruled by an overlord, because the government is actually just our will expressed by our consent with who we vote for. The whole push after the 2016 election and after Brexit and after a couple of other, social media run elections that went the wrong way from what the State Department wanted, like the 2016 Philippines election, was to completely invert everything that we described as being the underpinnings of a democratic society in order to deal with the threat of free speech on the internet. And what they essentially said is, we need to redefine democracy from being about the will of the voters to being about the sanctity of democratic institutions. And who are the democratic institutions? Oh, it's us. It's the military, it's NATO, it's the IMF and the World Bank, it's the mainstream media, it is the NGO.
Don't get mad at Trump when he says we don't need NATO. We don't need big banks, international banks. We should learn how to be completely self-dependent and independent. America does not need the world. The world needs America.
NGOs, and of course, these NGOs are largely State Department funded or IC funded. It's essentially all of the elite establishments that were under threat from the rise of domestic populism that declared their own consensus to be the new definition of democracy. Because if you define democracy as being the strength of democratic institutions rather than a focus on the will of the voters, then what you're left with is essentially democracy is just the consensus building architecture within within the democratic institutions themselves. And from their perspective, that takes a lot of work.
Ladies and gentlemen, let me know down below in the comments, what do you think about that? And what do we do in 2024 to make sure a repeat does not happen? I'll tell you this much. If they thought 100% what the outcome of the 2024 election would be, they would not be indicting Trump and doing everything they can to take him off the ballot. I believe he's going to win. We got Twitter on our side. We have other social media platforms that are not being censored. We got Tucker, who's not at Fox. So information right now flows much more freely and much further, the truth is, than in 2017, 18, 19, and 20. And that was a big thing that they had to use, was information. But now the information war is on our side. Ladies and gentlemen, hit that subscribe button. Give this video a thumbs up. God bless.